executive order. And for me, it was particularly meaningful because when I was a child, 5 years old, Pearl Harbor happened.
Yes.
And suddenly, overnight, we were seen as the enemy. We're Americans. My mother was born in Sacramento. My father was a San Franciscan. My siblings and I were born in Los Angeles. And one day, soldiers with bayonets on their guns and their rifles marched up our driveway, banged on the door, and ordered us out of our homes. When that happened, only one elected official in the United States, Ralph Carr, governor of Colorado, stood up and said, "This is wrong," and his political career was ruined. On the other hand, we had an attorney general who was ambitious. He wanted to run for governor, and he saw that the issue of locking up the Japanese, and I'm using the long word for Japanese, it was a three-letter word.
Right.
Lock them up was a very popular issue in California. And so this attorney general got in front of that issue and made an amazing statement. He said, there are no reports of spying or sabotage or fifth column activities by Japanese Americans. And that is ominous because the Japanese are inscrutable. You don't know what they're thinking. So it would be prudent to lock them up before they do anything. The absence of evidence was the evidence for him. And that reached all the way to the presidency of the United States, and President Roosevelt signed that executive order, which put 120,000 people in prison camps in the United States, run by the United States military. That happened, and only one elected official spoke up and said, this is wrong. Even the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, was neutral on that issue. And so in 75 years, we have made progress. America has a history. Certainly African Americans know that. The original sin. Great people who created, who defined this nation, set its ideals, kept other human beings as slaves. And so we've made progress. And yet you also described the challenges that we have. You said to an LGBT group, we have to have faith. But at a time like this, when this country is so divided, as you said, savagely divided, the haves and the have-nots, what do we have faith in?
Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge the truth. And if we are an America that wants to glorify and obscure the dark, ugly parts of our country, you weaken the greatness of America. Because I think that by confronting the truth about our country, the vicious sexism and racism, the despicable acts that occurred in our country's history, if you tell the truth about them, shine a light on them, I actually think you make America greater. Because what you said about how far we've come, if we've come a far away from a glorious past, that's not a great accomplishment. But if we found ways to overcome hate, to deal with demagogues, to take down barriers that divide, that adds to our luster and adds to our greatness. And so I get very frustrated at times where people want to strip our history of its ugly truths. And you speak to that. And the other thing that happens is we disempower ourselves in the present, because what you described, that type of politics you described, is not done. We still have demagogues. We still have people that are trying to exploit fears, irrational fears. We still have people that want to vilify or make enemies out of folks. And maybe it's not Japanese Americans or Black Americans. Maybe it's Muslim Americans or Mexican Americans. But there's still those strains within our culture. And if we remember where we've come from, and we remember how they were dealt with in the past, Father Conklin, McCarthyism, if we know our history, and how many people were hurt.
Trouble is, we don't know that history. Very few people know that history of the internment, and that's why it can be repeated again.
Right.
Although enough people know to rise up. The Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates said she will not defend it.
Yes.
The courts have backed her up. So we have come a long ways, but we still have challenges in front of us.
Right, but I think that is important, but I want to just, as you know, even more important than that, wasn't the people of high position that resisted or refused. It was those everyday Americans who did things to try to stop oppression. People who had no immediate stake in the game. I always think about Goodman and Cheney and Schwerner,
right.
Two Jews and a Christian, two whites and a black, dying together.
Right.
Ordinary Americans who said what's going on is wrong. And that's what's always given me this sense of almost like I'm not living up to that history, because even right now we have savage injustices. Before this current administration was put in office, unconscionable injustices going on in our country, where communities live in environmental conditions made by large, powerful interests, corporations and others externalizing their costs onto poisoning communities,
right.
or what's happening in the American prison system. I could go through things that the conscience of our country cannot condone. And it calls for a type of citizenship, a loyalty to the history that we have, to fight against, to speak out. Because what you just said, it's a quote throughout the ages, that the only thing necessary for evil to be triumphant
right.
is for good people to do nothing. And there's too much inaction in our country right now. We need to get more people, as I say, more folk woke to the realities that people are struggling in. And this is the reason why the Japanese internment was able to happen.
Japanese American
internment was able to happen, is because there's a sinister force in this country that wants to create an otherness based upon what? Religion, race, faith.
Yeah.
And that is not the truth of America. I mean, I always talk about the founders of our country, and I don't want to in any way minimize the depravity of that era in terms of slavery and sexism and that. Literally written into our Declaration of Independence, Native Americans are called savages. Women aren't referred to at all. Blacks are fractions of human beings. But there was a genius there, understanding that the only way a country can make it, we're the oldest constitutional democracy, the only way a country that doesn't have ethnic bonds or tribal bonds or religious bonds, that dare to put forth these ideals that were bigger than the men that uttered them, we had to have an unusual commitment to one another. And the Declaration of Independence, to me, is one of the greatest human declarations to interdependence. I say to love. And at the end of that declaration, they say, we must, if we're going to make it as a country, we must mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
And how do we do that today with what you describe as savage division? I mean, the people of Reading, Pennsylvania, the people that voted for Donald Trump, who are unemployed or underemployed, uneducated, making low wages, have just as much faith in Donald Trump as we have in you. And so we both have faith.
Right.
How do we build a common ground on which to deal with the issues that we are confronted by?
Right, well, so don't get me wrong. I think that we have got to fight for issues, whether it's the health care bill that threatens to take away 20 plus million Americans' health insurance. We've got to fight for issues like what's happening in the Justice Department right now, where they're rolling back protections for voting rights and civil rights. But I just, for me, and this is controversial, I think we've got to stop vilifying. We can vilify actions, but we cannot dehumanize each other.
Right.
And a lot of folks, whether it's in Reading, Pennsylvania, or anywhere in the country, and these are great communities with great histories, they feel like there's a disconnect between that force of love and caring and courageous empathy about the conditions that are going on for many people around this country. It's the first generation of Americans that's seen stagnant wages, where the differences between wealthy and poor are getting wider, and the stickiness, the poverty trap is growing deeper.
And how do you reach them? Because they're the people, whether it's in Pennsylvania or Indiana or Louisiana that support Donald Trump. And they hope that he's the Messiah.
Well, again, I think that we've seen with false prophets in this country time and time again that they have their comeuppance. And I think that what the President of the United States is preaching on a daily basis, the meanness, the demeaning, the degrading behavior, even to how he treats his opponents in politics, where he tries to dehumanize them or reduce them to labels. We should condemn that and have a faith that that's not going to last, that people are unveiled by history and by time. But that's secondary to me, to how we need to start dealing with each other. One, we have a responsibility to wake up the conscience of our country. Remember that the civil rights movement, during that time, a lot of people didn't know what was happening. To the Japanese American internment, a lot of folks were blind to the injustices that were going on. And the creative protests of civil rights activists who found ways to prick the moral imagination of this country, to pull back the veil to the truth of what's happening. We all have a responsibility to be creative agents of love and compassion and getting people to understand the conditions others are living in.
Dr. King, but at the same time we had the Black Panthers, and at the same time we had the rise of the KKK.
Right, but for me, when I look at our history, and I don't even want to contrast the Black Panthers' efforts of self-protection and the many things we're doing with King, I want to talk about the larger movement in an inclusive manner of people who understood that the status quo could not last in a country that professes liberty and justice for all, and that what they had to do, remember, the civil rights movement could not have been won by African Americans.
No, I was involved in it.
Right. It had to be won. I still remember King marching with Hawaiians who were wearing leis, marching with Jews, marching with gay folks, straight folks. It had to be an American movement for justice.
Right.
And bringing people in, I still remember the Children's March after after King was imprisoned in the Birmingham jails. Young people, it wasn't King's idea. It was James Bevel, Dorothea Cotton, young people as young as 7, 8 years old who decided that they were going to take to the streets. And Bull Connor met them with dogs and fire hoses. Right. And it so shocked the consciousness of this country. Suddenly people couldn't ignore the truth anymore and engage their activism. And so what I'm saying to you right now is King's eloquence, that when he said that what we have to repent for in this day and age is not just the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, but the appalling silence and inaction of the good people.
Right.
And so that's really, for me, I am going to fight the policies of our president that are hurting people. I live in a community where the median income in my neighborhood, in my so-called census tract, is $14,000 per household. I get up in the morning and I see the immediate urgency every single day when I wake up in my home in New Jersey of the work yet to be done. And frankly, even before the president was elected, there's outrageous injustice and urgency. But I'm going to tell you what, I don't want to make us who are resistors, if everything is about a man, if everything is about one person, if it's about what we're against and not what we're for, not who we're for, then we're not going to bring this country towards another stride towards freedom and justice. We've got to stand for love. We've got to stand for each other. We can't allow, I've seen one of the lowest points for me in the Republican primary for president was when my governor, who I can write a dissertation on my disagreements with, but I watched him after Hurricane Sandy, when we came together as a country, as a state, and President Obama came to see him. And I watched Chris Christie more than a year later on a Republican debate stage, and people were vilifying him for when the president walked down those steps for hugging him. As if we've gotten to a point where we've so demonized
right.
each other, American to American, that after a tragedy, a natural disaster, that we can't hug each other, that somehow Chris Christie was less of a man or a person or an American because he hugged somebody of a different party, of a president. That to me is sinister and despicable, and that's the kind of things that plant the seeds of our division. If I can't look at a Republican right now and see their divinity, to see their dignity, and yeah, we disagree, but if I can't understand the old African saying that says, if I want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And so the people that I am inspired by right now are, first of all, those people that aren't making the headlines, that are standing in the trenches, folks, heroes in my neighborhood who are there for other people, who work at the drug treatment center across my street, or who stand for the fight for criminal justice reform. But in addition to that, those people who will not let hate make them hate. They are continued activists of love. And that's why when you brought up to me what we talked about earlier, one of my favorite moments, because it's often during the darkest of nights that we are inspired by the stars, that I was at an airport, in Dulles Airport, Muslim ban. I went in to fight, to push the Customs and Border Patrol to allow people to have access to attorneys. But when I came out and I watched Asian and Latino and black and white, Christian, Hindu, Sikh, Americans, literally guys with kippas on, Jews with kippas on, cheering Muslims as they came out of the airport, cheering them. That was one of the most proudest moments I've had as an American, where I saw our country's truth, where people came out of their homes to be there for someone else who they didn't even know, who might not even have been an American citizen. That's the love, that's the principles, those are the ideals that we're about. And so that family in Reading, Pennsylvania, that has a Trump a sign in their yard, they are my neighbor. They are my fellow citizen. I will not hate you. I will not look down on you. I will not undermine the truth of who you are, that you have dignity and you want for your family and your children what I want. Yes, in the civic space we have to have arguments and debates, but if we descend into a country that has no ability for a courageous empathy or to call to the moral imagination of this country, if that's where we end up, then we're never going to get to where we need to go, a society that values us all and begins to help break through the veils that separate us to the truth, that the only way this country is going to thrive is if the people who we stuff in our prisons, or the people who we have that are stuck in dead-end jobs, living below the poverty line even though they work 40, 50 hours a week, the only way we get to a point where we love and have a sense of urgency about their condition is if we stop vilifying each other and see each other for who we are. And I'll end with this. You know, Ralph Ellison wrote this book, The Invisible Man, and you know from your own life what it feels like to be seen as less than human, or to be seen as without your dignity. This is the problem right now. One of my greatest heroes in Newark, tenant organizer, you'll never know his name, but he's responsible for thousands of people having a roof over their head, warmth, and water. I still remember the day he died. I walked into his, right when he was dying, he was in the hospice, and I walked into his room, and the only thing he could utter when I came in, because he was going blind, and the only thing he could utter to me was, when I walked in and I said, "Hey, it's Cory," he said, "I see you," which I know he physically couldn't. And then after talking to him, sitting with him, I kissed him on his forehead. And this great tenant leader, who I was upset about there not being more people there to see him, crowded rooms, but I realized that for this guy, it's not about popularity, it's about purpose. It's not about celebrity, it's about significance. And his last words to me were, "I love you." And that's the message. I see you, I love you. I see you, I love you. If we as Americans could begin to see each other and love each other and work and understand that I may be making it in America, but I'm not making it if my neighbor isn't. I'm not making it if a family's worrying about their health care, or worrying about how they're going to put food on the table, or living in an environmentally savage community. So we could start really seeing each other and understanding the truth that we are one people, e pluribus unum, with one destiny, that we need each other, that we belong to each other. If we can get to that point and understand that the lines that divide us are nowhere near as the ties that bind us, that's when America will ascend and continue to be a light unto nations.
Well, on Star Trek, we had a philosophy, a guiding philosophy: infinite diversity in infinite combinations.
Yes.
And that's our strength. And that's what makes life on the Enterprise an engaging and enlightening experience. And that's what infinite diversity in infinite combination. IDIC, we called it, the acronym, IDIC. Infinite diversity in infinite combinations, and you personify that.
Well, can I say something to you that might get me emotional? Because this is, this is Father's Day, and I get sad because my dad died 6 days before I became a United States Senator. Oh. And my dad was the guy that sat me down as a little boy to watch Star Trek. And I want you to understand why it was important for him. My dad grew up in a poor community in the mountains of North Carolina. He used to say, "Boy, I couldn't afford to be poor. I was just P.O. I couldn't even afford to be letters." And his name is Cory Alfred Booker. And he would tell me that his mother the thing that gave her lines of hope was seeing movies. And he told me he was named after Cary Grant and Alfred Hitchcock.
Ah.
And that he would sneak into balconies, segregated theaters, and watch movies that would transport him, that would ignite his dreams. And he used to always talk about, he saw a dream about Manhattan, this place that looked foreign, like a foreign universe, skyscrapers, about a salesman, and planted a seed. My dad ended up becoming, thanks to activists and civil rights activists, the first African-American salesman hired by IBM in the entire Virginia area. Did so well, top 5% of their global salesmen gets a promotion up to Manhattan. That seed of his as a child, seeing possibilities, really ignited in him something. And that's what art can do. Even in the worst of conditions, hostile conditions, segregated community, poverty, it can ignite something. Art can ignite something in this human spirit. And so what did my dad want me to watch when I was a kid? And he sat me down to watch Star Trek. And he wanted me to do it because he thought that this was the boldest view of the future that he could hope for.
That's right.
That this was showing humanity what's possible when people come together. It was for him to see a black woman on TV,
that's right,
a Japanese American man, that was
a Russian during the Cold War.
To a Russian during the Cold War, that was what humanity's aspirations were. And he hoped that it would plant a seed in me that I would be an agent to try to create that kind of inclusive world of science, technology, innovation, but more importantly than that, the human spirit coming together, working together, and creating a bold reality, that it wasn't the future, that we can make that future present in the now. So that's the gift that you gave me as a little kid and gave to my father.
Gene Roddenberry, he's the one that deserves the accolades.
You poured your heart and soul into that, and you were in my life from the time I was a kid, and this is like one of the greatest honors of my life to meet you.
Oh, may you live long and prosper.
May you as well. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.